The most expensive mistakes in life are usually made in a single sentence, and Rachel Walker learned that truth on a warm Friday night beneath crystal chandeliers and the applause of people who thought they knew our story. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 45 years old, born and raised in Illinois, and if you'd asked anyone at that party who mattered more in our marriage, they would have answered Rachel without hesitation. She was the successful one, the visible one, the woman whose photo appeared in business magazines and whose name carried weight in rooms filled with executives. Me? I was the quiet husband standing beside her, the man people greeted politely before turning their attention back to her. For years, I let them believe whatever they wanted. Maybe that was my mistake, or maybe it was my strength. Looking back now, I'm still not sure. The ballroom overlooked downtown Chicago, 30 floors above the city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline shimmered against the dark spring sky while waiters moved between tables carrying glasses of champagne and plates nobody actually came to eat. It was the annual fundraising gala for one of the largest nonprofit foundations in the Midwest, the kind of event where success wasn't measured by what you accomplished but by how impressive you looked while talking about it. Rachel loved nights like these. She belonged in them. Standing across the room in a black designer gown, she looked exactly like the woman everyone expected her to be. Confident, admired, untouchable. People laughed at her stories. They leaned closer when she spoke. They remembered her name after meeting her once. I watched from a distance with a glass of bourbon in my hand, comfortable in the background where I'd spent most of my adult life. The strange thing about being underestimated is that eventually it becomes peaceful. You stop correcting people. You stop explaining yourself. You stop needing validation from strangers who only see the surface. At least that's what I told myself. The evening drifted forward in the usual way. Speeches, toasts, small talk, expensive smiles. Then someone handed Rachel a microphone. At first it seemed harmless. Another joke, another story, another moment designed to entertain the room. The crowd gathered around her. Conversations faded. Heads turned. Rachel smiled, and for a second she looked toward me. There was amusement in her eyes. Maybe pride. Maybe something else. Then she laughed softly and said, "Let's be honest. Ethan would be nothing without me." The room exploded with laughter. Not cruel laughter. Not at first. Just the kind people offer when they think they're participating in a harmless joke. I heard glasses clink. I saw heads nod. A few people glanced toward me with sympathetic smiles. Others didn't bother hiding their amusement. Rachel laughed too. That was the part one remember most. Not the words. Not the crowd. Her laughter. Because it sounded genuine. Like she actually believed what she'd just said. I didn't answer. I didn't force a smile. I didn't leave. I simply stood there, holding my bourbon, listening as the laughter slowly faded into something else. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Unexpected. The kind of silence that makes people suddenly aware of their own breathing. Rachel's smile flickered for the first time. Around us, the city lights continued to glow beyond the glass. Waiters stopped moving. Conversations died before they started. And standing there beneath those chandeliers, surrounded by people who thought they understood my life, I realized something had changed. Not in that room. Not in my marriage. In Rachel. Because sometimes a single sentence doesn't reveal who someone is. It reveals who they've become. And what Rachel didn't know was that before the night ended, everyone in that ballroom would see a side of our story she had spent years overlooking. The silence lingered for only a few seconds, but it felt longer. Long enough for people to shift in their seats. Long enough for smiles to lose their certainty. Long enough for Rachel to glance at me again, searching for the reaction she expected and never received. Then someone cleared his throat. Another person laughed awkwardly, and the evening resumed as if nothing had happened. That is how most important moments begin. Not with explosions. Not with drama. Just a tiny crack nobody notices until the whole foundation starts moving. I lifted my glass, nodded politely to a few people nearby, and stepped away from the crowd. The bourbon tasted warm and familiar. Across the ballroom, Rachel was already surrounded by admirers again. She smiled, accepted compliments, and moved through conversations with the effortless confidence that had always made people gravitate toward her. Watching her from a distance reminded me of the woman I married 20 years earlier. Back then, neither of us had much. We lived in a 700-square-foot apartment outside Naperville with outdated appliances and a parking lot that flooded every spring. Rachel worked long hours at a marketing agency. I worked long hours too. We counted every dollar, shared takeout meals, argued over utility bills, dreamed about a future that seemed impossibly far away. The strange thing was that we were happiest then. Success changes people slowly, so slowly that you rarely notice it happening. One promotion becomes another. A larger house becomes a larger mortgage. Professional recognition becomes personal identity. Somewhere along the way, Rachel stopped viewing success as something we built together and started seeing it as something she created herself. At least that is what it looked like from my side of the story. Looking back, I can identify dozens of small moments I ignored. A joke at a dinner party. A dismissive comment during a vacation. A story retold in a way that quietly erased my role from it. None of them seemed important by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern. The problem with patterns is that you often recognize them only after they are complete. A waiter passed carrying a tray of sparkling water. Beyond the windows, traffic flowed through downtown Chicago like streams of red and white light. The city looked calm from 30 floors up. Orderly. Predictable. Real life rarely works that way. My phone vibrated once inside my jacket pocket. I glanced down at the screen. No message. No emergency. Just a calendar reminder I had forgotten to disable. The sight of it made me smile despite myself. Not because it was funny, because it reminded me of something important. Something Rachel did not know. Something almost nobody in that ballroom knew. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned my attention to the room. Across the floor, Rachel threw her head back laughing at another conversation. She looked completely comfortable, completely certain. And certainty can be dangerous, because when people become convinced they understand the entire story, they stop looking for the chapters they have never read. What I did not realize then was that before the night was over, Rachel would finally be forced to read those chapters for herself. For most of our marriage, I blamed stress. That was the easiest explanation. Successful people carry pressure the way marathon runners carry exhaustion. It becomes part of them. Rachel's career accelerated faster than either of us imagined. One award became another. One promotion opened the door to 3 more. By the time she turned 40, she was speaking at conferences, sitting on advisory boards, and flying across the country often enough that airport lounges felt more familiar than our own kitchen. I was proud of her. I truly was. The version of me people imagined did not exist. I was never jealous of Rachel's success. I celebrated it. I drove her to early morning flights, sat through endless fundraising dinners, listened to rehearsals for presentations that nobody else ever saw. If she succeeded, I felt like we succeeded. That was how marriage worked in my mind. Somewhere along the way, Rachel stopped seeing it that way. The changes were small at first. She began introducing me differently. Years earlier, she would say, "This is my husband, Ethan." Later it became, "This is Ethan." Eventually, I noticed she often skipped introductions altogether. At dinners, conversations drifted around me rather than through me. People asked Rachel about her projects, her plans, her accomplishments. Nobody asked about mine. The strange part was that Rachel never corrected them. She never intentionally insulted me. Not then. She simply allowed a certain story to develop. And stories have a way of growing when nobody challenges them. I remember one evening about 3 years earlier. We were attending a charity auction in Oak Brook. A businessman I had never met spent 10 minutes speaking with Rachel before finally turning toward me. He smiled politely and asked whether I had retired early. Rachel laughed before I could answer. "Something like that," she said. Everyone chuckled. I did too. At the time, it seemed harmless. Looking back, it felt different. Like the beginning of a road neither of us noticed we were walking. Across the ballroom, Rachel accepted another compliment from a group of donors. Their admiration wrapped around her like sunlight. She had become accustomed to it, perhaps addicted to it. The danger of constant praise is that eventually you start believing you earned every advantage alone. You forget the invisible pieces holding everything together. A piano melody drifted through the room from the stage. Crystal glasses reflected the city lights. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of desserts nobody seemed interested in eating. Everything looked elegant, perfect. Yet standing there, I found myself remembering simpler things. The apartment. The old Honda Accord with 200,000 miles on it. The folding card table we used as a dining room set because we could not afford real furniture. Rachel used to laugh at those memories. Lately she barely mentioned them. Success had given her a new identity. One she seemed determined to protect. My phone vibrated again. This time a message appeared on the screen. Just 6 words. The sender's name made me pause. I stared at the message for several seconds before locking the screen and slipping the phone back into my pocket. Nobody around me noticed. Rachel certainly did not. She was too busy enjoying the version of reality everyone in that room believed. What she did not know was that reality has a habit of revealing itself at the worst possible moment. And for the first time that evening, I began to suspect that moment was much closer than either of us realized. The message stayed in my mind long after I put the phone away. It was not dramatic. It was not urgent. 6 simple words from someone I had not heard from in months. Yet sometimes the quiet messages matter more than the loud ones. Around me, the gala continued in its carefully choreographed rhythm. A donor thanked a sponsor. A photographer guided couples toward a backdrop near the stage. Laughter rose and fell like waves across the ballroom. From a distance, everything looked flawless. That was the illusion successful people spend their lives creating. The illusion that everything is under control. I moved toward one of the windows overlooking the Chicago River. The glass reflected the room behind me. Crystal chandeliers, tailored suits, expensive dresses, smiles polished through years of networking. Rachel appeared in the reflection too. She was standing with a group of executives near the center of the ballroom. Even from 30 feet away, she commanded attention. I remembered when that confidence used to inspire me. Now it made me uneasy. Not because confidence is dangerous, but because certainty often is. Rachel had become certain of many things over the years. Certain she understood people. Certain she understood success. Certain she understood me. That last assumption was the one that concerned me most. 20 years of marriage should make 2 people experts on each other. Yet somewhere along the road, Rachel stopped asking questions. She stopped being curious. She decided she already knew every chapter of my story. Looking back, perhaps I helped create that mistake. I never corrected anyone's assumptions. I never felt the need to explain myself. Privacy became habit. Habit became distance. Distance became misunderstanding. The piano music ended. A few guests applauded politely before returning to their conversations. Near the stage, event organizers prepared for the next presentation. Rachel glanced toward me briefly. For a moment our eyes met. She smiled. It was a practiced smile. The kind people learn to wear at public events. Warm enough to appear genuine. Controlled enough to reveal nothing. I smiled back. Nothing more. Nothing less. Her attention quickly shifted elsewhere. A tall man in a navy suit approached her group and immediately received enthusiastic greetings. Rachel laughed at something he said. The people around her followed. It occurred to me that many of them admired Rachel without truly knowing her. Then again, perhaps the same could be said about me. My phone vibrated once more. This time I checked it immediately. Another message from the same sender. Slightly longer. Slightly more direct. Reading it caused a strange feeling to settle in my chest. Not fear. Not anxiety. Recognition. The kind of feeling you get when pieces of a puzzle begin fitting together after years of sitting untouched. I looked toward the stage. Event staff were adjusting microphones. The next portion of the evening was about to begin. Around the room, guests slowly returned to their tables. Chairs scraped softly against polished floors. Glasses were refilled. Conversations quieted. Beside the stage, Rachel took her seat near several influential donors and board members. She looked comfortable, confident, completely unaware that the evening was beginning to move in a direction neither of us had anticipated. And as the lights dimmed slightly across the ballroom, I found myself thinking about something my father used to say. The truth does not arrive with sirens. It arrives quietly. Then it changes everything. The lights softened as the master of ceremonies returned to the stage. Conversations settled into a low murmur. Silverware rested untouched beside expensive dinners that had grown cold during hours of networking. Around the ballroom, people adjusted their jackets, checked their phones, and prepared themselves for another predictable round of speeches. That was the funny thing about important nights. Most people never recognize them while they are happening. They mistake them for ordinary evenings. I remained near the windows, watching reflections move across the glass. The city beyond looked steady and permanent. The people inside the ballroom looked the same. Yet something beneath the surface had shifted. I could feel it. Across the room, Rachel sat among donors, executives, and board members. Her posture was relaxed, her smile effortless. If the awkward silence from earlier bothered her, she showed no sign of it. In her mind, the evening was probably back on track. A harmless joke, a brief, uncomfortable moment. Nothing more. The master of ceremonies began recognizing major contributors to the foundation. One by one, names appeared on large screens beside the stage. Applause followed each introduction. Some recipients stood. Others waved modestly from their tables. Rachel joined the applause with everyone else. She knew many of them personally. Some were friends. Others were professional allies. All of them belonged to the world she had spent years climbing toward. Then something unusual happened. A man I recognized immediately stepped onto the stage from the side entrance. Tall, gray-haired, impeccably dressed. Thomas Whitaker, chairman of the foundation's board and one of the most respected business leaders in the Midwest. His appearance was not listed in the evening program. Even the event staff looked surprised. The room quieted almost instantly. People listened when Thomas Whitaker spoke. He thanked the audience, shared a few remarks about the organization's future, then paused. It was a small pause, barely noticeable, yet it seemed deliberate. His eyes moved across the ballroom as though searching for someone. For a brief second, they landed in my direction. Then he continued speaking. Rachel did not notice. Neither did most of the guests. But I did. A few moments later, my phone vibrated again. I already knew who it would be before looking. The same sender. The same conversation. This message was shorter than the others. 3 words. We are ready. I stared at the screen for several seconds. The words themselves meant little to anyone else. To me, they carried the weight of years. Careful years. Quiet years. Years spent allowing assumptions to grow unchecked because correcting them never seemed necessary. I locked the screen and slipped the phone away. On stage, Thomas Whitaker concluded his remarks to enthusiastic applause. Yet instead of leaving, he remained at the podium. Papers were exchanged. Event organizers whispered among themselves. Something unscripted was happening. People sensed it immediately. The atmosphere changed. Curiosity replaced routine. Even Rachel leaned forward slightly in her chair. Around us, conversations disappeared. Every eye turned toward the stage. And for the first time all evening, I realized the next chapter of the story was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The ballroom grew quieter with every passing second. It was not the silence of boredom. It was the silence of anticipation. People sensed something unexpected was happening, and unexpected moments are rare in rooms where every detail is planned months in advance. Thomas Whitaker rested both hands on the podium and looked across the audience. The giant screens behind him displayed nothing but the foundation logo. No names, no schedules, no prepared slides. Just a pause that seemed to stretch longer than anyone anticipated. Beside the stage, several board members exchanged curious glances. At her table, Rachel sat upright now, her attention fully focused forward. The casual confidence she had worn all evening was giving way to curiosity. I could see it even from across the room. Thomas cleared his throat and smiled. "Before we conclude tonight's program," he said, "there is one recognition we have postponed for several years." A murmur moved through the crowd. People glanced at one another, searching for clues. Thomas continued, "Some contributions are public. They appear in annual reports and press releases. Others happen quietly, without headlines, without interviews, without recognition." The room listened carefully. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. "Tonight," Thomas said, "we would like to acknowledge someone who specifically requested that his involvement remain private for many years." Rachel frowned slightly. I noticed because I knew her expressions better than anyone. She was trying to solve a puzzle. The problem was that she did not yet realize she was part of it. My phone remained silent now. No more messages. No more warnings. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion. Thomas glanced toward the side of the stage, then back toward the audience. "Most people in this room know our scholarship initiative. Thousands of students have benefited from it. Many of you have donated generously. What very few people know is that the program itself would not exist without a single anonymous benefactor who funded it from the beginning." Several guests nodded respectfully. Others looked surprised. Rachel's expression softened into polite interest. She still had no idea. "For nearly 12 years, Thomas continued, this individual declined every public acknowledgement we offered. The room became even quieter. He believed the students mattered more than the spotlight. Something shifted in the atmosphere then. A feeling difficult to explain. Curiosity mixed with respect. Anticipation mixed with confusion. Thomas smiled again. However, after considerable persuasion, he finally agreed to allow us to thank him publicly. His eyes moved across the ballroom. This time they stopped directly on me. Around the room, heads began turning. One after another, like a wave moving through the audience. Rachel noticed it too. I watched her follow the direction of everyone's gaze. At first she seemed confused, then uncertain, then completely still. For the first time that evening, she looked at me not as her husband, not as the quiet man standing near the windows, but as someone she suddenly realized she might not fully know at all. And as hundreds of eyes settled in my direction, Thomas Whitaker spoke the words that would change the entire mood of the room. "Ethan," he said warmly, "would you please join us on stage? 800 people can make a surprising amount of noise, until they all stop at once." The ballroom had been filled with whispers, silverware, music, and conversation only seconds earlier. Now there was nothing. Just silence and hundreds of eyes following me as I set my glass on a nearby table and began walking toward the stage. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. My footsteps echoed softly across polished floors while rows of guests turned in their seats. The strange thing was that I felt calmer than anyone else in the room. Maybe because I had known this moment was coming. Maybe because I had spent years avoiding it. As I moved through the crowd, familiar faces stared back at me with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Some people looked as though they were trying to remember where they had met me before. Others looked embarrassed. A few seemed genuinely curious. Near the front of the room, Rachel remained seated. Her eyes never left me. The confidence she carried earlier had vanished. In its place was something I had not seen in a very long time. Uncertainty. I reached the stage steps and shook Thomas Whitaker's hand. His smile was warm and sincere, the kind shared between people who know more history than everyone else in the room combined. Applause slowly began spreading through the audience, scattered at first, then stronger. I stood beside Thomas as he returned to the microphone. "Many of you know Ethan Walker as Rachel Walker's husband," he said. A few nervous laughs drifted through the crowd. Thomas smiled politely. "That is understandable. What most of you do not know is that Ethan has quietly funded educational initiatives across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin for more than a decade." The room became still again. On the large screens behind us, photographs appeared. Students, graduation ceremonies, scholarship recipients, community centers, libraries, faces filled with hope and opportunity. Images from projects I had never discussed publicly. Thomas continued, "To date, more than 6,000 students have received scholarships through programs Ethan helped establish." Another image appeared, then another. The audience watched in silence. "Several years ago," Thomas said, "our board attempted to recognize him publicly. He declined. Repeatedly. A few people exchanged surprised looks. Thomas chuckled softly. In fact, convincing him to stand on this stage tonight required more effort than securing some of our largest donations." Laughter spread through the ballroom. Genuine this time. Respectful. Not mocking. Not dismissive. Just honest. My eyes drifted briefly toward Rachel. She looked as though she were seeing a completely different person standing on that stage. The truth was, I had not changed at all. I was the same man who shared a tiny apartment with her 20 years earlier. The same man who drove an aging Honda to work. The same man who celebrated every promotion she earned. The difference was that tonight, the room was finally seeing the parts of my life that had always existed outside the spotlight. And judging by the expression on Rachel's face, she was seeing them for the first time too. For several seconds after Thomas finished speaking, nobody moved. The applause had faded. The photographs on the screens remained frozen behind us. Students accepting diplomas. Families celebrating milestones. Moments that had changed lives. Yet the room seemed focused on something else entirely. Perspective. People were reevaluating everything they thought they knew. I understood the feeling. Sometimes the truth does not arrive as new information. Sometimes it arrives by forcing old information into a completely different shape. Thomas handed me the microphone. I accepted it but did not speak immediately. The ballroom waited. Across the room, Rachel remained motionless at her table. The expression on her face was impossible to ignore. Not embarrassment, not anger, something deeper. The look of someone realizing an entire narrative no longer made sense. I glanced toward the audience. Hundreds of faces stared back. Some curious, some respectful, some uncomfortable. Earlier that evening, many of those same people had laughed. I did not blame them. They reacted to the story they had been given. We all do. "Thank you," I said finally. My voice sounded calm even to me. "But I think Thomas is giving me far too much credit." A few people smiled. The tension eased slightly. The students you saw on those screens did the hard work. The teachers did the hard work. The families did the hard work. I simply had the opportunity to help. The room listened carefully. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. 12 years ago, I continued, I made a promise to myself. If I was fortunate enough to have resources, I would use them to create opportunities for people who needed them. I paused briefly. Recognition was never part of the plan. A wave of applause rolled through the ballroom again. Stronger this time. Genuine. I thanked Thomas, returned the microphone, and prepared to leave the stage. Then something unexpected happened. One of the board members approached with a framed photograph. It showed the first scholarship class from 12 years earlier. 22 students standing outside a community college in Rockford. Most people in the room had never seen it. The image had been hanging in my office for years. The audience watched as Thomas explained how those original students had gone on to become engineers, teachers, nurses, business owners, and public servants. The impact had spread far beyond what anyone predicted. Another round of applause followed. As I stepped away from the podium, guests began standing. One table at first, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet. The standing ovation seemed to stretch forever. I felt uncomfortable, honestly. Recognition had never been something I chased. Yet standing there, I realized the applause was not really for me. It was for what quiet work can accomplish when nobody is looking. My eyes drifted toward Rachel once more. Tears had gathered in her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Not the kind people notice from across a room. just enough to catch the light beneath the chandeliers. She was not looking at the stage anymore. She was looking at me, and for the first time in many years, it felt as though she was seeing me clearly. The standing ovation eventually faded, but the feeling in the room did not. People returned to their seats differently than they had left them. Conversations resumed in softer voices. Assumptions had been replaced by reflection. I stepped down from the stage and moved through the crowd once more, but this time the faces around me carried a different expression. Not admiration, not awe, understanding, or at least the beginning of it. Several guests stopped me to shake my hand. Others offered quiet congratulations. I thanked them politely and continued walking. Across the ballroom, Rachel remained near her table. She had not moved. For a moment she looked exactly like the young woman I met 20 years earlier. Not the executive, not the public figure, just Rachel. When I finally reached her, neither of us spoke immediately. The noise of the room seemed distant. The city lights beyond the windows reflected against the glass like scattered stars. Rachel looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "I did not know," she said softly. It was a simple sentence. Honest, unprotected. The kind people rarely say after years of pretending they understand everything. I nodded. "I know." She swallowed hard. "I thought I knew your whole story." I smiled gently. Most of us think that about the people closest to us. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything else. Strange how silence can feel completely different depending on what fills it. Earlier that evening silence carried embarrassment. Now it carried truth. Rachel looked toward the stage where volunteers were beginning to clear equipment. "When did all of this start?" she asked. I followed her gaze. "Long before tonight." She laughed quietly, though there was sadness behind it. "That is not what I meant." I understood. The question was not about scholarships or donations. It was about us. About the distance neither of us acknowledged until it became impossible to ignore. "I think it started when we stopped being curious about each other," I said. Rachel lowered her eyes. She did not argue because she knew it was true. Success had changed many things. Schedules, priorities, expectations. But the biggest change was subtler. We stopped asking questions. We stopped looking beyond the version of each other we thought we already understood. The evening continued around us. Guests prepared to leave. Coats were collected. Valet tickets appeared. Yet for the first time in years, Rachel and I were having a real conversation. Not about calendars. Not about obligations. Not about appearances. About who we had become. As we walked toward the elevators together, I glanced back one final time at the ballroom. Earlier that night, a sentence had revealed how small Rachel believed my world was. By the end of the evening, the truth had revealed something much larger. Not my accomplishments. Not my reputation. Something more important. Respect. Because money can be earned. Status can be lost. Recognition fades. But respect is built slowly over years of character, humility, and quiet choices nobody sees. The elevator doors opened. Rachel stepped inside beside me. The city stretched beneath us through walls of glass and light. Neither of us knew exactly what the future would look like. But for the first time in a long time, we were looking at the same horizon.